This book is often read during the season of Purim when the Jewish kids will dress up in different costumes to represent maybe God behind the scenes, or the fact that in many times in the societies that we live in, we have to wear these different masks, what it is to be in the Persian Empire and what it is to be a Jew. And we see Esther kind of living between those two worlds. We see Mordecai living between those two worlds. And so as Jews celebrate the Purim, they come together to read this text, and they all get really excited when they come to chapter 3, all the kids, right? Now, if you read the chapter, there's really no reason to be too happy or too excited, because it is a bleak look at human hate, right? Like, how is it that hate spreads in the world, who the person of Haman is. We get to meet the villain of the story, right? In fact, all the way up as we've gone through this book, we have recognized that there's going to be a problem, and God is putting people in place so that he can deal with that problem, but we have yet to figure out what the problem is. That is, if you haven't read the book already. In this chapter, we get introduced to the who and the what of the problem, right? Who is it that is the villain? Haman. And what does he do to spread his hate through the world? And so there's really no reason for kids to get so excited whenever they come to chapter 3. But I've given you a reason to be excited, because every time as they read this story, if you say the name Haman, the kids all make a racket, right? And so these are called graggles, right? These are called graggles, and you spin them to, I think it's the right, right? You spin them to the right. And the hope is that you just cover up the name Haman. We don't even want to hear it. You guys have already failed. Cover up the name Haman, right? You guys are getting better at it, right? We don't even want to hear it, because he is the true villain of the story. And so kids eagerly look forward to chapter 3, because they get to make a racket with their graggle. Are you guys going to be able to do that tonight? Yeah. I'm going to try really hard to make it through the whole thing. Only when I say Haman, right? We might need to put a limit to like 3 spins to Haman. There you go. There you go. All right. So we get to meet the villain of the story in chapter 3. And he comes to the scene in the most unexpected way. In fact, you wouldn't even, like, not only is it surprising, but it's a little bit awkward. Now, remember, when the story was written, there was no chapter divisions or anything like that. Those were added later for us to be able to find our place easy when we're studying Scripture. So the book of Esther really didn't have any chapter division. So really, to understand why Haman comes unexpectedly onto the scene, we have to look back at chapter 2, and what we find is that Mordecai is at the gate. Now, you might think that Mordecai is like a loiterer. You know, he's just sitting there at the gate. In chapter 2, verse 19, it says, when the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. But let's just understand what it is to sit at the king's gate. It's not like today where it's just a cool place to hang out. If in ancient times, if you went into a city, you had to pass through the gate. That means the officials of the city were at the gate. And so it tells us something about Mordecai. Mordecai is somebody who's a citizen. He's a loyal citizen. He is sitting at the gate doing his job, right, as an official of King Xerxes in the Persian Empire. He's not loitering, right? It's not where he's just hanging out to cool off during the day. He is there with a job. And as he is there, we find out that Esther continues to be obedient to Mordecai, and she doesn't tell anybody her identity as a Jew. But looking down at verse 21 of chapter 2, we find out that during the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigithan and Tarsh, 2 of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about their plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And so Mordecai's there at the gate doing his job, a loyal citizen, what he's supposed to do. And as he's there, he hears of a plot to kill the king through an assassination. Really interesting, this king ends up dying in just this way a few years later, right? But the first plot is thwarted by Mordecai, because he's there at the gate doing what he's supposed to do. And when he hears that they want to assassinate the king, he tells Esther. Esther gives credit to Mordecai, and the king's life is saved. He's a good citizen. What you would expect is for some kind of reward, some kind of like good job, pat on the back for Mordecai, but he doesn't get a reward. He gets nothing. In fact, it tells us in verse 23, and when the report was investigated and found to be true, 2 officials were impaled on poles. All this is recording in the book of Annals in the presence of the king. Nothing for Mordecai, right? Now, that's where chapter 2 ends. But if you took out the chapter division, it would read like this. All this was recorded in the book of the Annals in the presence of the kings. After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman. Yes. Now, doesn't that sound like awkward? When Mordecai did the right thing. He did what he was supposed to do. He's a loyal citizen. And all these events happened, and then the king promoted Haman to the second position in the kingdom. What an odd thing to happen. If you're reading that, you, as a reader, you should be thinking, wait a second, Mordecai did the right thing. He's the one who was supposed to be honored, but instead it wasn't him that was honored, it was somebody else. His name was? I didn't even say it, guys. I didn't even say it. So, hey, yeah. So Haman gets promoted. There you go. He gets promoted. And the king has a decree. If you read about it in chapter 3, it says, he elevated him, giving the seat of honor higher than any of the other nobles. So he's the second within the kingdom. And all the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman. For the king had commanded this concerning him, but Mordecai would not kneel or pay him honor. And so once again, we find Mordecai doing the right thing. He refuses to bow down. It doesn't even tell us exactly why Mordecai doesn't bow down. The assumption is that it has something to do with his Jewish faith, right? But we'll get into that a little bit more later. The point is that the king commands that everybody who sees Haman go through the gate. They must bow down to Haman. But Mordecai refuses. He won't do it. And Haman doesn't realize what's going on. In fact, he probably wouldn't have even known that Mordecai wasn't until all of the other officials at the gate began to ask Mordecai, why do you do this? Why won't you bow down? And he says nothing. They're asking a question, not just asking him the reason why he doesn't do it, but they're trying to challenge him, like compel him. You should bow down to Haman, right? But he refuses, and Haman finds out about it. Now, he finds out about it because the royal officials go to him in verse 5. They say that Mordecai will not bow down to him, and he was enraged. You guys thought I was going to say Haman, right? He was enraged. He was upset. But it's not like he was so upset he wanted to take care of the matter quickly. He could have. He could have went to the king and said, hey, there's this guy Mordecai. He's not bowing down to me. We need to do something about it. He's not obeying the king's commands. But instead, Haman looked at Mordecai and he realized that it was more than just this person. They were Jews, and Haman didn't like Jews. He did not like them. So what it says is in verse 5, when Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down and pay him honor, he was enraged. You have learned, yet when learning who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for ways to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. It wasn't enough for him to hate one person. He needed to hate them all, right? And so he decides to come up with a way. Then we find out the name. What he does next is he goes on Pur. Now, what is the holiday the Jews celebrate? Purim, right? And this is where this word comes from. In verse 7, it says, in the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, or the month of Nisan, the Pur, that is the lot, was cast in the presence of Haman. So he does exactly what every Persian person would do. He goes on the first day of the month and he casts lots to try to find out what is the will of the gods, right? Because Persians had multiple gods. What is the will of the gods? And he would have been smart to do this before ever going to King Xerxes and giving him his plan, because if he hadn't done this, then he would seem, when going before the king, that he was unprepared, right? So he's got to go and cast a pur so he can find out the day that he can annihilate, to destroy the Jews. And that happens on the first day of the first month that he casts the pur. And what it lands on is the 11th month. So he's got almost a year before he can act, right? We know what his plan is. He wants to annihilate the Jews, not just Mordecai, all of them. We know what he has to do first. He's got to consult the God, cast the pur, right? So he does it, and it falls on the 11th month. He's got to wait a year before he can destroy the Jews. But now he's got to go before the king and talk to the king about his plan. And so we find out that he does that in verse 8. He goes to King Xerxes, and he says, there's a certain people dispersed among the peoples in the province of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all the other people, and they do not obey the king's law. It is not the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued and destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for his royal treasury. So he tries to bribe the king to do what he wants, right? So first of all, he spreads like a half-truth, and then he tries to bribe the king to destroy this certain people. This king is, I guess he's so naive, he doesn't even ask about the people. In verse 10, it says that, so the king took off his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. I don't know who was that over there, but you're way off. No, it's Haman. Only say it when I say Haman. You guys missed two, right? So he goes to the king, spreads half-truths, attempts to bribe him, but doesn't even tell him who the people are. There's just certain people in the kingdom who are dispersed, and they don't follow the customs. They're a danger to your kingdom, and you should get rid of them. And the king doesn't say, well, who are these people? How do they act? What are they doing that is dangerous? Why is it not in my best interest? He doesn't ask any of those questions. He simply trusts the source and doesn't check any of the facts and just hands his signet ring over to Haman. Now here's the thing. Haman, with that signet ring, can issue a decree, and that decree cannot be overturned. And so when he does that, the Jews are in a real bind. He takes the signet ring, and in verse 12, it says, then on the 13th day of the first month, the royal secretary issued a summons. They wrote out in the script of each province and in the language of each people in Haman's orders to the king's satraps, governors, and various provinces, and the nobles of the various people. These were written in the name of King Xerxes himself and sealed with his own rings. Dispatches were sent by couriers to the king's provinces with the orders to destroy, kill, and annihilate the Jews, young and old, women and children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the text and the edict was issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality so that they would be ready for that day. The 12th month, the 13th day on the 12th month, is the day of the purge, right? You can go through the whole kingdom of Persia and kill, destroy, and annihilate every Jew, man, woman, and child. Purge them from the empire. And that's the decision. The carrot, I guess, in that is that you get to plunder all their goods. And you know, after deciding to destroy, kill, and annihilate an entire people group, what do you think Haman and the king do? I didn't think these things would be dangerous, Craig. What do you think? They decide to party. Here's what happens. In verse 15, it says, the couriers went out, spurred by the king's command, and the edict was issued at the citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down and got drunk. They sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered. After deciding to destroy, kill, and annihilate an entire people group, they sat down to have a cocktail, right? Like there's... The only reason that so many Jews look forward to this part of the story is so that when the word Haman is said they could make a racket and try to cover up that name completely, because he is definitely the villain of this story. What he wants to do is pure evil, it's pure hate, and he's an expert at spreading it throughout the kingdom, right? He is the villain of the story. And I think what we're going to learn about this is that even in these dark moments of life, behind the noise is this, symphony of God's sovereignty working throughout it. It's God's plan is being done, but not on the foreground, right? You read this chapter and you're wondering, where is God in the text? But God is behind it, in the background, and his will is going to be accomplished in the end. And so that's the story itself in chapter 3. And I have a few points, 4 points actually. The first point is that Mordecai is faithful in the face of injustice. Mordecai is faithful in the face of injustice. And that's something that I think, when you look at our world, doesn't it seem like sometimes the wicked prosper, right? In fact, Jeremiah asked that question. Let's read it from Jeremiah. He in Jeremiah chapter 12, he comes before God and he says, your ways, you are always righteous, Lord, when I bring a case before you. God is righteous. So you're always righteous when I bring a case before you. Yet I would speak with you about your justice. Why do the wicked prosper, and why do the faithless live at ease? Right? That's Jeremiah's question. Isn't it seem like a question we struggle with today? Like, you look at the world and you're like, man, I'm doing everything right. I'm doing the right things. I'm a good citizen. I'm faithful to the Lord. And yet it seems like the wicked are the ones that are receiving all the benefits. Now, Jeremiah has a great explanation, or God speaks to Jeremiah and gives him a great explanation, but we're not preaching on Jeremiah today, so we're going back to Esther, right? Because I want to point out that maybe this is something that Mordecai would have felt like. He would have been looking at all this saying, I don't understand. I'm doing the right things. I'm being faithful to my community. I'm a good citizen, and I'm being faithful to my God. But for some reason, Haman is the one exalted. And for some reason, when I'm faithful to God, Haman wants to destroy the Jews. It's why do the wicked prosper? See, Haman was a good citizen. Wait, let's back it up. I just wanted to say Haman, I guess. Mordecai was a good citizen, right? We find him at the king's gate. Again, he's not loitering there. It's an official position. Everything that goes in and out of that city has to go through the king's gate. Those people there are there for a reason, doing their job. Not only did Mordecai do his job, but because he was loyal and a faithful citizen to the kingdom of Persia, to Xerxes, when he finds out that there's a plot to assassinate the king, he's the one that saves the king's life. He does the right thing. He is a good citizen, and he goes unrewarded, right? Well, at least at this point in the story, he goes unrewarded. You would think, right? If you took out the chapter division, you would think that the very next line wouldn't be that Haman was elevated to the seat, second to everyone, underneath the king and second in the kingdom. You wouldn't have thought that. You would have assumed that Mordecai should have gotten some kind of reward. But instead, Mordecai is faithful in the face of injustice. And he still continues to do the right thing, even though doing the right thing didn't get him a reward. Next, we find out that as the king gave a decree that Haman is the one that has to be honored, Mordecai won't do it. And we're kind of left with those people, the other officials at the gate, wondering, why won't Mordecai bow down to Haman? Now, I have a couple theories, right? Like, first of all, the Bible itself doesn't say that you can't bow down to someone. In fact, as I started to read through the Old Testament, there's countless examples of people bowing down to other people. Just some examples. Joseph's brothers bow down to him when they don't even know who he is. They think he's a pharaoh or a official of Egypt, and they come before him and they bow down before him. Nothing is said that was wrong or that they shouldn't have done that. If that wasn't enough, we also know, going back even further, that Jacob bows down 7 times to Esau. whenever he's going back into the land. And God never gets angry about that. So maybe bowing down was something that was okay before the law was given at Sinai, but then after? But you can find stories after the law is given. For instance, David prostrates himself before Saul, right? So it doesn't seem as if you're reading the Old Testament that it is against the Jewish law to bow down to people, right? It happens throughout, and there's no comment saying that that's a bad thing to do, right? But there is a text that says we shouldn't bow down to idols or people who put themselves as God. So we can read that. It's in Exodus. You guys all know this. This comes out of the Ten Commandments. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 4, it says, "You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord, your God, am a jealous God." Like, I'm going to stop there. I am a jealous God. You can't bow down to idols or things that promote themselves up to be God. So for this reason, many people believe that maybe Haman had some kind of signet on his robe. You guys all missed that one. Good jobs. Right? Many think that maybe Haman had some kind of signet or pin on his robe that was why Mordecai wouldn't bow down. Or he was expecting more than just for Mordecai to bow down, but to worship him in some way, right? Because whatever reason that Mordecai won't bow, it is because he is a Jew. When the officials go and talk to Haman, they ask, is it lawful for, they ask, is it because he's a Jew, right? Let me read it because I'm misquoting it. In chapter 3, the officials go to Haman. Starting in verse 4, it says, "Day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore they told Haman about it to see whether or not Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, for he had told them that he was a Jew." Right? Persia had more religious liberties than their predecessors, than Babylon or Assyria. And so they were going to Haman to find out if the reason that if it was lawful for a Jew not to bow, since they have other customs, and Persia had some religious liberties. Whatever reason he won't bow down, it's because he's a Jew. And it's my assumption that it's because Haman wants more than just to be honored. He wants to be worshipped. Still, Mordecai does the right thing. Not only is he a loyal citizen, he saves the king's life, but he's loyal to God. He refuses to bow down. And yet, instead of a reward, Haman looks at him and he wants to destroy not just Mordecai, but all Jewish people. Sometimes in this life, even when you do the right thing, you're a good citizen, you're faithful to God, it seems to go unpunished. But as Christians, we know that God works good for all those who love him and are called according to his promise. So we know, regardless of the noise of the world, when we do what is right, we are storing up treasures in heaven where moths and rust don't destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. This world at times looks noisy, crowded, like an unjust place. But God is going to come and bring justice throughout. And that's something that we can look forward to. My second point, this is going to be fun. Haman's wickedness is detestable to God. Haman's wickedness is detestable to God. You know, I should think twice before giving you guys toys. God tells us what it is that he looks at. What is a despicable character? What is the kind of person that is detestable to God? Of course, we know that God looks at the heart, right? We see that whenever he chooses David. He looks at the heart. But he also tells us what is despicable, what type of person. The book of Proverbs, chapter 6, tells us the despicable person. We've read this a couple times in the Tuesday night class, and every time we do, I draw a little person with lips and eyes and all that, right? Because listen to how it's described. Proverbs chapter 6, verse 16 says, "There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush to evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community. Like verse 19 is just describing the overall person. He's a false witness. But Haman, there you go. Haman acts in all these ways. He's got proud eyes. Now that comes through first when he's so enraged that they won't bow down to him. But I want to read a verse from chapter 5, verse 11, where he's sitting amongst his family. And listen to how he talks. Esther chapter 5, verse 11 says, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king has honored him, and how he had elevated him above the other nobles and officials. You see him boasting? He's got proud eyes, right? That's the thing that God says that he despises, proud eyes. But how about a lying tongue? He goes to the king and he tells him a half-truth. He doesn't tell him the whole truth, right? There's a certain people. What type of people? Who are the people? Oh, just a certain people. Some of it is true, what he's saying, but it's veiled, it's hidden. He's got a lying tongue. He's got hands that want to shed innocent blood, right? The decree goes out that all Jews, women and children, will be destroyed on this day. He's got hands that are quick to shed blood. He's got a heart that plans wickedness, right? When he when he realized that Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him, he said, it's not enough to just kill Mordecai. I need to go after all the Jews. He's planning wickedness. His feet are quick to rush to evil. Now, it doesn't seem like it because, well, wait a second. He cast the pur, and they said that the pur landed on the 12th month, so he's got to wait a year to carry out his evil plot. But, it didn't take him long to write that decree, did it? To stir up the hate. He was quick. He personifies the person out of Proverbs chapter 6, right? He is the type of person that the Lord detests. He detests him because he has proud eyes, a lying tongue, hands that are quick to shed blood, a heart that's wicked, and feet that rush to evil. I think, as I considered this point, I think he makes the best villain, right? Like he hits all the check marks. If we're talking about the kind of villain, Haman is the perfect villain, right? He's wicked and detestable. And yet, he is the one that prospers. In this chapter, at least. He is the one that's elevated to the second seat. My third point, I'm going to be really quick about these next 2 points. I want to look at my third point is Haman spreads his hatred through the empire. Haman spreads his hatred through the empire. You guys are getting tired, huh? I can tell, right? Let me try again. Haman spreads, there you go. Haman spreads his hatred through the empire. The reason I wanted to really talk about this is because I think nothing has changed in our world, right? If you want to go-to guide on how to spread hatred through an empire, Haman's got it figured out, right? So by looking at what he does, just maybe you might be able to recognize it whenever you see it in your own society, right? He's somebody that spreads hatred throughout the empire. The first thing he does is he has a real agenda, but he keeps it secret, right? Look at verse 8. It says, Then Haman said to Xerxes, there are certain people dispersed among the peoples in your provinces. You see how he just says there are certain people? What is missing from that? Who the people are, what they're doing. He's got a real agenda, but he's not willing to tell the king what his real agenda is. Of course, we know the real agenda might have something to do with the fact that Mordecai wouldn't bow down, right? That's the obvious on the surface agenda. He is upset that this one official at the gate won't bow down. And still, you'd still have to wonder, why would he want to kill an entire people because one person won't bow down? That's kind of an over response, right? That's too much. But the author gives us some clues that helps us to understand not just why he doesn't like Mordecai, but why he doesn't like any Jews, right? Let's go back to when Haman is introduced, right? You're going to see that his hatred is actually a generational hatred. It's something that goes far back beyond just this man won't bow down to me at a gate. When Haman is first introduced, He's called the son of Hammedath. I'm not saying that right, but I don't know. And then it says he's an Agagite. Who knows what that is? The first enemies of the Jewish people, right? Now, when I say the first enemies, I remember, like Mount Sinai is the covenant creation. They become a nation at that point. The very first enemies that stand against them are the Amalekites, right? And there you are, like the very first nation, they won't let him pass, and Moses has to stand on a mountain and hold his hands up, and he's as every time his hands are starting to lower, they begin to lose the battle. But it's the Amalekites that are the first enemies of the Jewish nation, right? They've been made a nation at Sinai, the first enemies that they come across. See, what happens is they begin to win the battle when Moses keeps his hands up, and then when he lowers them, they start to lose the battle. But after the battle's won, God says, I want you to write this down for generations to remember, right? These people are going to be an enemy for you for generations to come, right? And he wants to completely destroy and annihilate them because they opposed Israel, but God said, when you enter the land, that's when that's supposed to happen. In that text in Exodus, it says that God is going to continue to protect them for generation to generation against this enemy. Then Saul comes onto the scene, right? The Amalekites, first enemy of the Jews. Saul comes on the scene, and God tells Saul, I want you to go against the Amalekites because they are the ones that opposed Israel. And God told them that he wants to take out their king, Agag. Now, did you notice that Haman is an Agagite? And so in Samuel, what we find out is Saul doesn't do it. 1 Samuel chapter 15, verses 7 and 8, it says, Then Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt. He took Agag, the king of the Amorites, alive, and his people. Right? He took him alive. He was supposed to take out this king, and he doesn't. Right? Saul is disobedient. And for generations and generations, the Amalekites and the Jews just don't like each other. And who is Haman? He's an Amalekite. In Esther, it calls him an Agagite, a son of Agag, the king of the Amalekites. See, Haman's hatred is generational. It goes far back. It has more to do with the fact that his family didn't like this family than it does the fact that Mordecai didn't bow down. I mean, in fact, if it was just about Mordecai, he could have stopped it right then. He could have said, this man is not obeying the king's directive, and Mordecai would have been punished then. But it wasn't enough. He had a veiled agenda, and that's how hatred spreads. It's generational. It's a veiled agenda that is hidden behind the scenes when he says, there is a certain people. The first question the king should have asked is, who are the people? Where are they from? He doesn't ask any of that. And then he moves into a half-truth. He says, there's a certain people dispersed among all the people in the province of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all the other people. Now, that part would have probably been true, but the Persians had more religious liberty than many other nations before them, so it also had applied to many other nations, not just the Jews. But he goes on to say that they don't obey the king's law. See, it's a half-truth. These people are different. You should be afraid of different people. They don't obey the king's law. See, that's how you spread hate. First of all, you have a veiled agenda that you don't tell. And then second of all, you tell something that is true and lead people to believe that it's actually dangerous. See, I think differences can often be beautiful, right? Especially when you see a people like the Jews who are honoring God in the way that they live. That's a beautiful thing. And Mordecai is not somebody who was unloyal to the Persian Empire. In fact, he was somebody who rescued the king. So it's a lie. A lie in hopes of getting the king to do what he wants, to spread his hatred. Then on top of that, he adds a bribe and says, I'll give you 10,000 talents of silver, which was a ton of money. So maybe Haman was really rich. But that's how he spreads his evil. Then he sends out the decree a year early. and he promises all the people that you can purge or you can plunder all the Jews. And as that message spread throughout the empire, you have people now seeing the incentive of killing an entire people group. If I can just take out my neighbors, I can get their stuff. Haman's an expert at spreading hate in his community. He's got a veiled agenda. He spreads half-truths. He tries to bribe. He tells the people you can plunder. And he counts on his audience to not care about the facts. I mean, king doesn't even ask. He just trusts his source. Why should he do otherwise? Haman's a good guy. And so he never questions, who are these people? What are they doing? See, that's how you spread hate in an empire. Veiled, you trust that your audience isn't going to look too deep at the real facts. And Haman does it. I want to move on to my last point because I'm already way over time, but if I ended there, this would be the saddest sermon ever, and I don't want to end it on a sad note. Oh, there's the dirty looks. Sorry. I want to move it past the sad. See, it is definitely a bleak look on humanity, right? You've got the righteous doing the right thing, and yet the wicked are the ones that prosper sometimes. You've got this man, Haman, who is the representative of the person that God despises. And he spreads hate throughout the whole empire with half-truths, veiled agendas, bribes, and an audience that won't check their sources. What is God doing behind the scenes? I mean, if that's just the chapter, then where is God behind all the noise, behind all the racket? Is he working? Does he care? My last point is that it's the Lord that determines man's destiny. See, Haman went to the Pur, and there's some clues in there that show that God is going to redeem his people. See, he goes to the Pur on the first month, the month of Nisan. Anybody have any clues on how God might redeem? What is the first month? Then the decree goes out on the 14th day, or the 13th day of the first month. Are there any clues about God's redemption in that date? Does anybody know what the 14th day of the first month is? Passover. The day before Passover, the decree goes out that you're going to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews. And the one thing that the people can remember the next day as they're preparing their sacrifice is that God has delivered us from people like this in the past. They can take that lamb and they can look at it and see how God rescued them from Egypt. Not just rescued them from Egypt and brought them across the sea, but the first time that they went against the Amalekites, God was with them, and he promised to be with them from generation to generation and generation. They get this decree the day before they celebrate God's redemption, and I'm thinking that they probably thought God can do it again. At least that's what I think. And that's the truth of it, is God's the one who ultimately controls destiny, right? The lot is cast on the lap, but it's God who makes the choice. And he's controlling the destiny of these people. And sometimes it doesn't look like it from the surface, from the foreground. All you see is hate and noise and destruction, but God is doing something in the background. In fact, the cross was just that. See, when Jesus went to the cross, it probably seemed a lot like this, bleak and sad. You've got this person, our hope was in him. We thought he was the Messiah. And yet, now he's been beaten. He's had a crown of thorns pushed into his scalp. He's wearing a purple robe, which they peel off his back just to reopen the wounds. He's placed on a cross. The Messiah, the one that they thought was going to rescue them, is now dead. And it's those dark moments that you think there's just no hope. Like chapter 3 of Esther. But what's really going on in the background is not darkness, but a symphony of God's sovereignty. Behind all the noise, right? I want to end by reading a verse out of Colossians chapter 2. We just studied Colossians, and I really like this verse because it shows the darkest point in history that actually God is doing something amazing in it. Colossians chapter 2, verse 13, it says, when you were dead in your sins and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made you alive with Christ, for he forgave us all of our sins, having canceled the charge of our legal indebtedness, which stood against us and condemned us. He has taken it away, nailing it to the cross. Having disarmed the powers and the authority, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. I wonder how many people who would have been at the foot of the cross watching Jesus in agony would have described it by like him making a public spectacle or him being triumphant. They probably wouldn't have looked at the cross and thought triumph until Jesus rose. And if you're in chapter 3 of Esther and you look at Haman's hate, you're probably not going to look at it and think triumph. But behind all the noise of the world, God is working. He's doing something. There's clues that he's going to redeem. The decree goes out on the 13th day of Nisan, the day before Passover. God has redeemed you in the past. He will do it again. I went way over time, so we're going to stop there. But if you're looking for a church or a church home or just someone to pray for you, we invite you to come forward. Just know that Haman isn't going to win this story, right? I waited for you guys to all put down the noisemakers. You know, the word Haman is said 53 times in the book of Esther. You guys get it just this night. We're not doing it the rest of the book. Okay? You can take the noisemakers home. Paint them, right? I would suggest putting on the line that I came up with. I was thinking through it. It's behind the noise of the world is a symphony of God's sovereignty. I think that's such a kind of interesting thing. And as I was irritating my kids with noisemakers, I was thinking of that. Let's...